The crisis came within the first 2 to 3 hours of your sickness. You either survived or you were dead.
As the world is gripped by a pandemic unlike any in living memory, it's inevitable that we're talking about global outbreaks from history. One of the deadliest was the Spanish flu, which spread across continents with astonishing speed just over a century ago, killing an estimated 50 million people. But was it anything like the virus we're dealing with today?
All of a sudden, as I recall it, out in Kansas, one soldier got the Spanish flu. And from there, it gradually spread to various parts of the country.
As the First World War drew to a close, outbreaks of deadly influenza had begun in several countries. But wartime censorship meant it was kept secret or brushed off by national governments, helping the spread. That was until the neutral Spanish authorities reported that a strange form of disease of epidemic character had appeared in Madrid. The name Spanish flu stuck, but there's no evidence that that's where it began. Casualties skyrocketed across Europe, and US troops returning from the war brought the disease home. Just like coronavirus, there was no immunity to the new contagion. A survivor of the influenza pandemic recalls the speed with which the virus took hold.
When the flu epidemic hit, somebody would ring, let's say they rang the doorbell at 6 a.m. in the morning and said, my mother just passed away. I want you to take care of the funeral service. That before the sunset on that day, that whole family was gone.
Perhaps the most terrifying feature of Spanish flu was its virulence among young, otherwise healthy adults. Over 90% of those killed were under 65. That's quite different to the disease we face today, where the elderly and vulnerable are most at risk. Both coronavirus and the Spanish flu are respiratory infections with common symptoms like fever, but they belong to different families of viruses. Symptoms of the COVID-19 illness take several days to appear in most people. The deterioration with Spanish flu was far more rapid.
Fortunately, we had a very wonderful doctor. And he took care of me and he pulled me out through very quickly because, as I said, the crisis is there. It came with an intense fever and you were gone.
The options open to health authorities in 1918 were also limited. Back then, there were no antibiotics, and there was no prospect of developing a vaccine. Getting information to people about how to protect themselves was quite difficult. But the measures needed to defeat the virus were strikingly similar to those used today.
Everybody wore these face masks, like you see in a surgical room. And you must remember this, that in the flu epidemic, all congregations and gatherings were forbidden. There were no schools, there were no church services, there were no meetings of any kind. Everything was forbidden of people to come together.
Where social distancing was implemented, as in St. Louis, casualties were minimized. In cities where warnings were ignored, or faith was placed entirely in surgical masks, as in San Francisco, thousands died. As today, guidelines that were issued, particularly in army training camps, were easy to ignore and often loosely enforced. Where the dangers of the virus had initially been downplayed, public trust in what the authorities told people was eroded.
The memories were so deep in their mind of those that survived or that didn't get it, they were reticent. I would say to about 1922 or thereabouts, where people were willing again to go back to congregating and to feel at ease in church or in school.
The population suffered 3 waves of Spanish flu over 2 years, and an estimated 500 million people were infected around the globe. It wasn't until 1920 that the virus was considered eradicated. The world might be an entirely different place in 2020, but have we really learned the lessons from a century ago?